So this is our final session of the day, and brilliant to end with a minister coming to talk to us about their vision, the things that they're doing. I am absolutely thrilled to have Minister Gould, Parliamentary Secretary at the Cabinet Office. It's quite unusual to have a minister in a role who has actually done the stuff before, but as I'm sure you all know, Georgia Gould has led mission government in Camden, is a true public service reformer, has actually done this on the ground and transformed services in a local area. So it is both fantastic to have someone who has experience in the role that you're doing here today, but also that clearly is such a passionate advocate of making sure that our public services work for people, they're delivered in the most efficient, effective way, and they're delivered with purpose, understanding that actually people's lives are deeply impacted by what the state does on a day-to-day basis. So I'm thrilled that we have Minister Gould here. She's going to give us a keynote address, and then we will sit down and I will have the joy of being able to do a little bit of in conversation and then open it up to everyone for questions. Minister Gould, thank you so much.
Thanks so much for the incredibly kind words, and it's wonderful to be here. I think this is your first event as Restate, so to celebrate the new name, and I was here for a little bit of a conversation earlier and got very excited about the procurement discussion. You were actually quite lucky I didn't storm the stage. Anyone who works with me knows I'm really into procurement. I was genuinely at a wedding recently and started talking very excitedly about government procurement and just saw like one by one everyone like, just gonna get a drink actually. But hopefully this is an audience that can embrace that discussion. Sapna, who leads on civil service reform, has been kind of keeping me up to date with a discussion this morning. So I know it's been a really fruitful and deep discussion, and that reform, Restate, the artist formerly known as Reform, over a long period has done a huge amount of thinking about public sector reform, about how we do things differently, and today builds on that massive legacy. And I think we've also heard today the strength of the case for change, and something I certainly feel, but also how hard that can sometimes be. And I remember something that really brought this home to me as I went to my first senior salaries review body, and I was, full of confidence and all my great new ideas, and I kind of talked about them very passionately. And then one of the very experienced reviewers was like, "Well, that's all well and good, but I've got some notes here that says Mo Molan said all of this 25 years ago, and what are you going to do that's different?" So I feel like I'm a little bit more world weary, but also equally really determined to make that change. And I think one of the real joys of the role has been getting to know the civil service. And as a new MP and a minister, I've been really grateful to the civil servants that I've met, who just the depth of their expertise and their desire to serve the public. And I've been able to get out around the country talking to civil servants in lots of the different hubs, and the overwhelming thing that people always say is that they choose to work in these jobs because they want to serve the public and they want to make a difference. But they also talk about some of their frustrations with how the system is working, how hard it can be to get things done, some of the silos, the layers, lots going up but not everything coming back down. And just some of the basic things that don't work. You were talking about the future of AI, but just basic IT systems not talking to each other, issues with passes and laptops. This is something I experienced myself. 3 months in, my pass stopped working, and I went to get it looked at, and they said, actually, it's only been set up for 3 months. And I don't know if that was a vote of confidence in myself or just, says something about the average span of a ministerial career over the last 10 years. But, these are small things, but they really make a difference in terms of productivity and how easy it is to do people's jobs. And the civil service is a historic institution, and there's just so much to be proud of about that. The seamless handover of power that just happened, the professionalism with which that was done, the depth of the values of impartiality and integrity. And I think, these are very deeply embedded and shouldn't be taken for granted. But some of that depth of history means it's been set up really for a slower world, a less complex world, a more hierarchical world. And I think we can all feel that the structures we have are not fit to meet this new world. Departments are far too siloed when all the challenges we face are deeply complex and connected, and an all-knowing centre can't solve all the problems in every corner of the UK. And I think we have brilliant people who are stuck in systems that don't work and aren't able to achieve what they are capable of, and we need to change that. And I think at the heart of that is how we work hand in hand with local and regional government, businesses, house builders, the front line and communities. And I feel really, really excited about the potential of missions to deliver this. As you were saying, I'm incredibly passionate about missions. And I came to missions during COVID. I was leading Camden Council and chairing London Councils. And we saw in that time just the urgency of the task in front of us. And we did things, within days and weeks that in previous times would have taken us years, like huge changes, bringing everyone who was homeless in off a street, setting up new food distribution networks. And we managed to work completely differently with businesses and the voluntary sector, new partnerships. We cut through the kind of barriers and red tape that stops things happening. And we did it because the challenge was so immediate and we needed to work differently. And I really wanted to bring that same sense of energy and pace and purpose to the long-term challenges that we saw that we hadn't made progress in, and some of which were really exposed by COVID, the depth of health inequality or food poverty. So we developed 4 missions with our community, and over the years that we kind of went on this journey, I saw just how powerful the missions approach was, because it belonged to everyone, not just the council. And, there was a massive role for us as local government to deliver, but we were asking our communities, businesses, the voluntary sector to help. And over time, you started to see the power of all of that pulling together. From Google, who is a local employer, opening up a new AI campus for local young people, through to a young ex-offender who was working with young people at risk of going into being drawn into crime and talking to them about how to change their lives, through to us as a council investing in a community wealth fund supporting young entrepreneurs. And these things started to connect, and action started to be taken that we had no idea about, that we hadn't incubated at the council. And we saw it break down silos between organisations and start to change the way we operated well beyond the individual missions. So for me, missions are about a new way of governing, one that is outward-looking and drives new partnerships. And I think that a lot of the civil servants I speak to absolutely want to work in this way. But I think right now this is not routinely how government operates. At the last survey, there was some really stark data about collaboration that said that less than half of people reported collaborating with civil servants in other departments and agencies to achieve common goals, whereas this should be the default way of working. So we need to deliver as government, but we also need to inspire, we need to catalyse, we need to form real partnerships. And I think there have been moments of really profound cross-governmental change. I was talking to Tamara Finkelstein recently about Sure Start, which was essentially a mission to really transform outcomes for children from when they were born, or One Login, which is a brilliant One Government programme to make government much more accessible and seamless for citizens. But I think too often the default is not that. It is silos, it's centralisation, and it's doing things in a closed way. And it's very easy to see why that happens. The direct day-to-day accountability, political and financial, is in departments. The constant, intense media scrutiny is not a forgiving environment for mistakes or missteps. So there is an impulse sometimes to keep things tight, to have lots of checks, and it sometimes doesn't feel like there's a lot of space to take risks. And of course, while ministers can often be a source of huge transformation, politics can also drive speed and short-term announcements rather than a long-term programme. And I think I can say what maybe some of the civil servants will always be too polite to say is that the constant churn of ministers we saw over the last government actually there was so much stop-start, people stopped believing that things would follow through. And I think sometimes the attempts to create order over a system that is sprawling has ended up in kind of blunt controls that can actually add more layers, even though they're trying to help. And I think as someone new, I've actually been really surprised by how much brokenness people just operate in on a day-to-day basis. Sticking plasters on top of sticking plasters, agency staff to fill gaps, and some really fundamental issues that haven't been addressed or have been left for a rainy day, too difficult right now. And I think within this, there's been a kind of grinding down of confidence and autonomy. And too often really great people actually don't believe things can change. They kind of start with some of the barriers rather than the possibilities, because they've operated in a system that has knocked some of that confidence and hope out of them. And I think we're missing the energy that comes with really opening up new resources, ideas, solutions that weren't immediately obvious. And now when I really need energy, I go out into the community and see the amazing work that's happening, but that isn't something that routinely happens. But I think the civil service is absolutely full of people who want to work differently, who can see the problems in front of them. And if they're asked to help solve them rather than finding very ingenious ways to work around them, which they do, I think we could unlock huge change at pace. One anecdote that always stays with me is talking to Fiona, who's our brilliant head of people, and they were doing a piece of work to try and kind of test and learn new approaches to recruitment to speed it up. And they went out to departments to ask for good practice. And at first, nobody wanted to send them in because they were scared that they would be stopped doing their innovation. And I think that says a lot about where the culture is. So I think we need to create a culture that rewards innovation, that supports people who are taking risks and accepts that sometimes things won't go well, and enables and scales really great work, to give civil servants agency and confidence, to do things differently and link them into the best of what's happening in communities. And we're very serious about long-term change and rewiring the state so that the public always comes first. And we are trying to drive some foundational changes to unlock this through our plans for a more productive and agile state. And we definitely need the right skills and capacity for a digital age. The conversation we just had focused on that. And I don't know if everyone's read the State of Digital report, but it is really sobering reading. 9% of major tech programs are assessed as green. 70% of people who were surveyed said that their data landscape is not well coordinated, interoperable, and does not provide a unified source of truth. And 28% of the systems that people are using are outdated legacy systems. So there's a massive need for change just to make this work better. And I think the new Digital Centre for Government is a massive opportunity, and they're systematically working very closely with us in the Cabinet Office, trying to work through these issues to ensure that we are set up to be a modern government. And we're challenging ourselves to be more productive, to save time and money by simplifying how we do things, from procurement, my favourite subject, to using AI to help us around discovering fraud. And in an ongoing cost of living crisis, when we want to invest more in the front line, we have a duty to be rigorous in our focus on productivity, which is why we started the SR with a zero-based process to make sure we weren't just layering new priorities on top of old programmes. We're reviewing arm's-length bodies to ensure that there isn't duplication, and we're really trying to look at every single avenue to ensure that things are as effective and productive as possible. But more broadly, I think we're determined to work differently to seize the scale of the opportunities of mission-driven government. And for me, I think there are 3 big shifts that are critical to achieving this. The first big shift we need to do is to break down silos and put people first. I think the operating model of our state has too often been Central government at the top, local regional government, services, and then people down at the bottom. And we put people through processes that are designed at the centre and don't really see them as people. So they get 10 minutes at a job centre or 10 minutes in a homelessness assessment, and they end up bouncing around the system, don't meeting different thresholds for support, spending years on waiting lists and waiting to be in so much crisis that someone is there to help. And I think if we continue to work in silos and see our little bit of the problem, then we're going to continue to create that fragmentation and confusion on the ground. And if you start with people, how they live, their aspirations, who's important to them, you would never design the public services that we have, which have ended up, despite all the brilliant work going on, too siloed, too focused on crisis, mismatched boundaries, and too often actually detached from the strengths of communities. So our job is to change things, to put people first, and people should be able to access public services in a way and at a time that suits them. There should be no wrong door when you need help. Public services are able to respond together. And they should have a solutions that make sense for their community, designed with and for them. And the mission structures are the first step to changing this, cross-departmental boards with shared governance over long-term challenges, and they're driving new ways of working. But we're building on this by asking government to come together in new ways, to pool funding, to integrate data, to set shared outcomes, to routinely work cross-government with shared purpose and shared accountability. And this is critical for delivering our missions, for reforming public services, but also for saving money, because investing together on a range of outcomes cuts out duplication and waste and creates opportunities to use the scale of government, whether that's to buy once and well or to share some of the back office functions. The second big shift I think we need to see is to bring policymakers and delivery much closer together, working flexibly and at pace. In my 14 years in Camden, where we are today, Whitehall was literally down the road, but it often felt very far away. And too often, the work we were doing to create public services that supported people, that valued the relationships that mattered to them, often felt that we were doing that in spite of government. And it was lots of different decisions, multiple grants, all with their own detailed reporting, lots of rules and checks, and a lack of coherence from different parts of government, things that need national approval, and a one-size-fits-all approach for councils that led to that. And I am a massive proponent of devolution and localism with decisions made closer to communities. But I think a strong devolved system goes hand in hand with a stronger and smarter centre, which is setting a national direction and national standards, able to make sense of data, able to step in when there's failure or to step in and find great practice. But I think the layer that is hardest and arguably most ignored is the messy middle in between, because many challenges that we face require a joined-up approach between the centre and local places. Sustained partnership, teams working together across different levels of government. And I think we've been particularly poor at this. And I remember in the COVID crisis when test and trace was being developed, and those of us in local government were saying, look, we have people on the ground who know their communities, we can do this. But a national system was developed that cost billions, and kind of when that had, that issues had happened with that, then we came back to local places and said, actually, can you help? Whereas imagine if we'd started to build that together from the beginning, how much money would have been saved and how much faster we would have got better outcomes. So I think there needs to be that new approach, shared teams taking on challenges together, and a constant feedback loop from what is happening on the ground through into the centre. And I think key to changing this is how the civil service does policy. I think policymakers need the opportunity to be out in communities, working with job centre staff, social workers, residents, building from their experience. When there were issues with UC, universal credit, it was working in that way with a job centre in Sutton that started to reform that programme. Because those on the ground know what isn't working. They can tell you how people fall through the cracks. They know the problems. And my boss, Pat McFadden, made a speech where he set out this commitment to a new approach, where we don't just make decisions in Whitehall, but innovate together with the front line, backed by a 100 million investment fund. But our test, learn and grow approach isn't just about a new fund, it's about a new way of working that starts small, tests ideas, constantly learns and tweaks as you scale, rather than needing to design everything up front, which I don't think worked ever actually, but certainly doesn't work when the technology is moving at such pace. And we will invest in developing our people so that they have the skills and knowledge to work in this way, more people who are designers, who can rapidly prototype ideas with communities. And I know that there are real barriers to doing this, otherwise it would have scaled already. And that's why the test and learn approach is not just about testing new approaches on the ground, it's actually testing new approaches at the centre, where we find rules that are holding us back, changing those rules. And then the final shift is that the civil service needs to become a more outward-looking organisation. Partnership with local and regional government, civil society, communities has to become the default way of working. All of our missions require deep and long-lasting partnerships. So, for example, if we are going to make real progress on health inequality, we have to work differently. I remember when I was leading Camden, we did a citizens' assembly with residents on what was the biggest health inequality issue. And I was expecting something like GP access or maybe obesity to come out. But actually the number one thing that residents says was it was social isolation. So if you're designing a system around social isolation, you have to work with communities, faith groups, high streets, and bring them into making change. And at the same time, we need to drive government delivery, but we need to help and mobilise these new partnerships. And I think the magic happens when we pull all this together and we find common purpose and new connections. So we want to see new problem-solving partnerships, drawing on innovation on the ground. So government can help catalyse change and provide a framework to grow social innovation, but we have to be open and think differently about the levers that we have. So the public sector has enormous buying power, 400 billion a year, and rather than just buying goods and services, we want to use this to support jobs, skills, opportunities, and grow industry and innovation. Equally, the public sector owns a huge amount of land around the country, and rather than look at that in isolation around the needs of one department or one or a council or one service, actually how we can use those assets to collectively transform places, unlock land for house building and support the missions. So we're determined to be a more open and a more porous organisation with talent coming into the civil service from all different sectors with a flow of new ideas and perspectives. And this also means the civil service being a truly national organisation. We recently announced plans to grow the civil service presence in 13 locations around the country. And we want you to be able to start your career in the civil service and get to the top of the civil service in places around the UK. So starting with a school leaver apprenticeship and plans to ensure that 50% of senior civil servant roles are outside of London. And we don't want those just to be offices that are in places. We want those to be places where civil servants are working with people on the ground to test out new ideas, and places that we draw in new talent. And I think there's massive opportunities for places for growth to support social mobility. The opportunity mission is about unleashing the talent in the country, and we need to make sure that's real in the civil service. So the task ahead is to rewire the state from the ground up. And standing here today, that might feel really enormous, but I know the energy and optimism that comes from working with communities is deeply infectious. And across the country, I meet people all the time in Grimsby and the Wirral around the country who are finding new ways to improve things, powered by absolute love and pride in their places and communities. And too often they felt that they've been doing that at the margins or the edges or having to battle the status quo. But I think if we invite them in and ask them to help us to change things from the inside out, I have absolutely no doubt that we will see huge transformation quickly, and things that standing here today feel really impossible will quite quickly become very possible. So we'll be starting with Darlington, Sheffield and Leeds with community mission challenges. These are new teams bringing together civil servants, council officers, frontline workers and communities to work together to test new approaches to take forward the growth, opportunity and health mission. And we'll also be developing a new secondment programme launched between local and central government to share experience and skills. We want to develop this approach locally and then scale it so we're getting behind people, creating change that they can really see and feel in their cities, in their towns and their villages. And I hope that those teams and the teams that we will grow around the country and in London will feel like some of the most exciting and dynamic places to work in the civil service, really on the front line of mission delivery. Because our missions are not just missions for government, they're missions for the country. They belong to everyone. And there's very much an open invitation to everyone in this room, civil servants, non-civil servants, to be part of making this happen on the ground. And I'm really, truly excited to see what communities will create when we give them the power to lead lasting change.
Thank you so much. Huge amount in that, and I think really exciting and brilliantly picking up so many of the themes actually that we've been discussing today. We've got about 15 minutes for questions, so I'm going to just ask a couple myself, so I'll be restrained, so that then I can open it up to the floor, as I'm sure lots of people will have questions. I think it's really brilliant to hear you talking about empowering both people within central government in their roles and then also in public services themselves, in local communities. It's also a profound cultural shift in the way that things have been done. You talked yourself about how central government has been historically quite insular, a bit defensive. But part of that is also because, and again you mentioned this, that it involves a huge amount of risk in letting go, in ministers trusting people to get on with it. That's going to require different accountability systems. I guess coming back to the point that you made at the start of someone saying to you, but isn't this what Mo Molan talked about a while ago? Sort of, how does it look different? You know, what is going to change so that those people in those different place-based communities in different parts of central government are thinking, I am going to take that risk. I am going to come up with that idea. I'm going to behave differently.
Yeah, I think that the change kind of needs to be at every level. So the mission structures at the top through to, you know, what I was talking about, which is change from the ground up. And I think when I was in local government, I used to, you know, you can come and speak here and say, oh, there's so much energy and it's amazing. But actually, I think there's something powerful about just doing the change that you want to do. So actually just getting out and doing things differently, not writing a whole paper about it, but actually starting in these 3 places. Let's give people real permission. You know, we're saying publicly, we want to do things differently. This is about taking risks. We're going to put in development for those individuals. We're going to create joint teams. And you are there to test new approaches and see what happens and kind of, you know, be there to support that program. And if that goes well, you know, others will go and see it, and then we grow it to more places. So I think there is a real energy from starting and from making connections. And you know, when we were doing missions in Camden, the kind of power would come at a mission summit when you had somebody from, you know, director at London Zoo and a tenant rep and somebody from the council, and they were all starting to talk together, and you start to see, you know, possibilities and opportunities that weren't there before. So I really believe if we start that work from the ground up, you will start to see real energy come from doing things. At the same time, we need to make sure we're creating that political space and that joined up approach from the centre. And I think, you know, as the power is when those 2 things start to really join up.
And it feels like and this is, I imagine, you know, a large driver of why the government is being really quite ambitious on devolution, because it feels like that's a lot easier to do when you're doing it in a local area. It's a place-based model where accountability systems are embedded within that local area itself. I guess for civil servants in central government, you know, there is still the sort of parliamentary scrutiny model for ministers. So in letting go, what does that mean for then being called in front of PAC when something hasn't worked out? Or how is that going to look different for ministers where the accountability is still very much sitting in central government? And how is sort of having the back of those people taking the risks? What does that look like in practice?
Yeah, I think two things on the. As I said, I really do believe deeply in devolution, and I think at a place level you can really knit together the services around people. But I think you also need to have a way for some of the ideas and the ways of working to kind of feed back into the centre. So I think that connection loop is so important, and it is about a new partnership. But to the question of accountability, I think just being really, I think part of sometimes what we do around devolution is that we kind of aren't really very clear about these are the outcomes that we expect, and these are the freedoms that we're giving you to deliver those outcomes, and this is how we over time will hold you to account, and with some transparency about what happens if over time those outcomes aren't met. So I think there's something about the outcomes that we set for places and being really clear about that, and our own within the civil service, what are the things that we need to deliver and what is the accountability across government to do that, and there's different models of creating change, and I think we often hold on to one which is we set a kind of process control across the system rather than saying to civil servants across the system, actually, we are going to ask you to deliver that, like say, more secondments across government, and we're going to hold you to account for that. And actually, we want you to be creative in how you do it and use your, the knowledge you have of the barriers. And it's a shift, and I think that's the kind of shift we need to make, both for the relationship between the local and centre, but also the relationship between the centre of government and the rest of a civil service.
Brilliant. So I promised I would only ask 2 questions, even though I really want to ask.
I went on too long.
No. You didn't at all. They were very succinct answers, and I'm going to restrain myself in asking a question about procurement in the hope that maybe someone in the audience will do, because you definitely
probably bring it up.
You definitely are in the right place. There's no one here that's going to think that's too geeky as a topic. So I'm going to open it up. I'm going to take 3 questions. We do only have about 10 minutes, so if I can ask you just to give your name and organisation and your question rather than any greater life story that goes with it, then we can get through as many as possible. So, Michelle, yours went up very, very quickly, and then there's a gentleman behind, so I'll take those 2 first.
Hi, I'm Michelle Clement. I am... Is this on? Yeah. I'm a lecturer at King's and also the author of The Art of Delivery, which is all about the delivery and how they did it back then. It's fascinating to hear your experience and energy, and inspirational to hear how you're galvanising the civil service. Question, what did you learn by the end of your time in Camden that you wish you'd known at the beginning?
Great question. And the gentleman just behind.
Thank you. Will O'Brien from PwC. Anything more you can say on the 3 trials being set up on place-based working, and then just ever so slight, and then another thing, whether there's anything you could say around the freedom being given around technology, particularly sort of AI within those systems.
Great. Should we take those 2 and then we'll go for others? So, what do you wish you had known at the start that you knew at the end? And presumably, are you applying that now?
Yes, I think that's such a great question. I think I need to think about it a bit more, but the thing that really immediately sprang to mind is that when I started leading Camden just over 7 years ago, I had this real determination to turn the council inside out and work differently with our communities. And on that journey, I think the mistake that we made at the beginning is we would get all these kind of experts in to kind of help us do this, and to work with the community, and that it just every time it didn't quite work. But when we actually built up the capacity of our own voluntary sector organisations, our own residents to be leaders, that was the thing that made the shift. So I think there's something about really making sure that we are bringing our own capacity. And I think the thing I really learned from working in Camden, and actually Camden taught me this, was that you can the power of possibility and change, if you bring the right partners in, is extraordinary. So we would often if we saw a problem, we wouldn't say, oh, that's not the council's problem, it's DWP's. We would be like, okay, this is a problem in our community. Who can we bring together to fix it? And we created quite like massive foundational change, huge investment because of that way of working. And so I think I believed that. I had a hunch of that, but I saw it happen so many times that now I believe it so strongly, and I'm definitely trying to bring that belief to the role I have now. And then the question about the work we're doing with the free places. So we have had hubs, civil service hubs, for a long time. I deliberately didn't want to change the name because I think that the work to move civil servants out of London that the last government did was really positive. But when I went to meet people within those hubs, quite often I'd kind of ask them, did they come from the local area? And a lot of them did and wouldn't have got jobs in the civil service if they hadn't have been there. And then I'd ask them if they were working differently across government, and they'd say, not really. And so within these hubs, even though there were like 4 departments, they'd have their little section with signs up, and they weren't necessarily working together. And I'd ask them if they were working differently with the place. And they might talk about, oh, we're going in to talk to some school kids about careers, but they weren't fundamentally testing new ideas with the place. So, for me, that's a massive missed opportunity to really, have people in those places, cross-government, testing new ideas. So what we want them to do, and we've been discussing this with, we've got the place leaders and the civil servants and the mission leads all on board, is to choose a challenge which kind of sits under one of the missions. So we're not going to define that from the centre, but it could. We've been doing a test and learn with Sheffield about access to family hubs, for example. It's a great programme, but actually not always the right people are using it or able to access it. So taking a challenge. You might be school readiness, might be working to support needs, and having a team that sits across the council, the community, and the civil service to really run together at delivering it, with learning and development, with support to be able to do that, and secondments in and out of local government. Because I think one of the things that people have said to me is, so, firstly, secondments are hard, but secondly, if you do one, you kind of get forgotten. No one says, oh, that's this brilliant experience you've got from this council. They're like, oh, where have you been for the last couple of years? So I think having that as a really structured programme that we're developing with the LGA. So, that's the kind of model that we're starting. And it's linked to the Test, Learn and Grow programme that I talked a little bit about earlier, which is the backed by the Innovation Fund, which is working in a very deep way with a place to take on a public service challenge, and we'll be launching 10 of those in the summer. I've become a real civil servant because I talk in seasons, so we're launching those this summer. But it's saying actually I never wanted that just to be a project. I wanted it to be a new approach, and so I think it's really important that through these through the Places for Growth, we're really kind of actually trying to embed this into how civil servants are working.
Brilliant, thank you.
And yes, on AI, I'm very hopeful that they'll be able to use new technology as part of that.
Great. Hand at the back, James, and then Paul, you were very quick up as well.
Thank you. James Johns from Workday. Here's your procurement question, Charlie.
Oh, thank you.
So our friends from Restate have written about the notion of everythingism, the belief that every proposal, policy or project is a means for promoting every national objective all at the same time. And I wondered, Minister, whether you could tell us whether you recognise an inherent risk in burdening too much in the way of social outcomes on top of procurement. Government is not always brilliant at buying the thing it needs when it's only looking for the thing it needs. And if you add too much sort of social outcome on top of that, I worry that you'll end up, prioritising, well-meaningly prioritising sort of social outcomes at the risk of the thing that the government needs to run correctly.
Thank you. And then Paul?
Paul Morrison from the Planning Inspectorate. So I'm completely 100% utterly sold on the kind of way of doing public service, but I also know why myself and my fellow civil servants might be nervous about it. And if you expose a vulnerability of a problem, you're worried that other people will then use it to generate kind of negative publicity. And I just wondered whether, from your experience in Camden and elsewhere, how do you kind of create that safety and the willingness to take risk and the cover to do the kind of things you're talking about?
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that is a really brilliant question. I've heard so much about your work and commitment to relational work. I think I think a few things. I think there's something about how you set it out from the start. So when we talked about launch, test, learn and grow, and Pat talked about it, it was very much, we don't have all the answers. We're going to try some things. We're going to rapidly test them. And actually, if they don't work, we're going to be really transparent about that and stop doing them. And so I think, actually being explicit from the beginning that this is the way we're working. So there's not that real fear of like, this is going to go wrong and, we're going to create a massive story. It's like, well, that's okay. We've set out, that's how it's going to be. But I also think there's something about you have to, that's the role of politicians and senior leaders, is to hold the space. And, there were definitely times when I was leading Camden that I got like really strong criticism. We were doing some work about imagination in policy, and you can imagine one of our opposition was like, why are you spending money on all of this? And I was like, well, actually the systems we have are completely failing, so we're going to need some imagination to develop something that actually works for people. And so I think we just have to, lean in and be really clear that we are doing this differently, this is why, this is the evidence base. In Camden, we were the only council in the country to get outstanding adults and children's services. So, absolutely confident that it works. I remember Treasury coming to see us and they were like, coming to see how we were saving so much money. And then, when they turned up and it wasn't some kind of great spreadsheet, it was all this
imagine they were terrified.
Relational activism, and we have a big sign saying to love is to act that the parents put together. So I think, that there is, being actually really clear about the evaluation and the outcomes, that this is not, drawing on the strength of communities and handing over power is not a soft, mushy thing to do. It's a really kind of strong and evidence-based intervention that we can get behind. So yeah. So, and change doesn't happen overnight. Like, people will take a risk and they'll see how the system reacts, and if it reacts how it always has, then they'll probably withdraw. But if it doesn't, they might take another one, and that's the change that we need to see. But I think politically there is such a strong commitment to this, and hopefully over time people will feel that they have much more space to operate in, and within that, the other thing I'd say is that we often I think people sometimes think, the missions are over here, there's a team doing them, and actually, like, everyone has permission to work on the missions. They don't need to wait. They can just get on with it and start leading projects, and that kind of innovation is going to be really valued. So I think that's the shift that I hope people will start to see, but it needs to be held by all of us, and that's why your position and the position of other civil servants here is so critical to be part of that change. Procurement. Yes, I think there's a social value. I think there's been two issues. One is that it can sometimes, there's about 40 different definitions, and it can be very confusing for those applying for contracts to really kind of navigate that system. But also on the other side, people put beautiful documents in about everything they're going to do, but it's rarely tracked and evidenced, and we're not totally clear if it's happening. So I do think that we need a simpler but a stronger system. And so if, being very clear as government, we want you to track interventions around jobs, skills, and opportunities. This is what is important to them. This is what we're going to actually properly monitor. These are the metrics that we're going to hold people, suppliers, to account to. And I think if you get government public sector contracts, those are the things that you should be delivering, rather than kind of a whole kind of range of a wide-ranging role, different metrics. So I think there is actually the Chancellor was talking about it this weekend. There is a real desire to make it stronger and simpler. And I think we need to work with suppliers and contracting authorities to deliver that.
Brilliant, thank you. Sadly, we have come to the end of our time with the Minister, but I think we will in 1 second just say thank you. But I do just want to reflect that I think even just the amount of energy and enthusiasm and passion that you're bringing, I think comes off so clearly to people and really will resonate with everyone in the room. It certainly really resonates with a lot of the work that we're doing at Restate and will continue to do, hopefully, to help think through some of these problems and reflect. I do just want to say experts are still important, even if we also want to connect into communities. So we want the think tanks, really. For sure. Absolutely. But the idea of getting into actually talking to the people who use the services, the people running the services, is just fantastic to hear, because that's where actually the knowledge and understanding of what's going wrong and what's working is. So we are going to say thank you. Joe is just going to step up in a second once we've said thank you to Georgia to do some closing remarks and then handing very briefly to Simon after that. But can we say a massive thank you to Minister Gould for joining us?